In this video, we combine some of the most disturbing cave diving tragedies that happened in Florida that we've covered on this channel so far. From divers who got lost in the silt to divers who made a wrong turn and struggled to find their way out. If you enjoy watching these videos, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more exciting cave diving stories like these. In 2001, two newly certified divers endangered their lives by going against basic diving safety rules. Trained in open water diving, these two diving buddies entered a cave at Royal Springs Park, Florida, and got themselves into trouble. There are several springs, sinkholes, and underwater caves in Suwannee County, Florida. Among them is this most fascinating park called Royal Springs Park. It's a well-known spring for swimmers, scuba divers, and all lovers of outdoor recreation in Suwannee County and Florida in general. The park is seated on a 5-acre landmass. The basin of the spring forms a big pool that's approximately 160 feet by 105 feet. Though its depth varies due to the effects of rainfall and aquifer levels, it's usually about 42 feet deep. The basin of Royal Spring is enclosed by high walls, which are about 25 feet high. Other fascinating things about Royal Springs Park are the natural beauty of the forest that surrounds the park and the corridor of a river connected to the Suwannee River. Your adventure to Royal Springs Park promises to be a memorable one if you follow all safety precautions. Now, let's look at the story of two newly certified divers who went against the safety precautions. On February 18, 2001, the 19-year-old Mark Granger went for a dive into Royal Springs together with his friend William Ridenauer, who was 34 years old. At 4:30 p.m., they started diving into Royal Springs together with their diving instructor Christopher Whitlock and his diving partner. Mark and William were both from Kingsland and Gainesville, Florida. Their initial intention was to dive into the pool of the spring just for exploration, while their instructor was to retrieve a concrete anchor from the pool. Mark and William had just received their diving certification, but this was just for open water diving and not cave diving. Open water diving is a dive in which you can directly access the surface while diving straight up without any overhead obstruction. Sunlight directly impacts the water, giving it natural visibility without the use of artificial light. Open water diving is more recreational diving. Cave diving, on the other hand, is a form of technical diving instead. This is diving that requires diving within an enclosure. You have overhead and side obstructions. This means that you can't get to the surface by merely diving straight up. In some caves, you need to crawl and squeeze yourself into tight passages. Special equipment and training are needed for cave diving. The four divers had been divided into two teams, the instructor and his partner in one, and Mark and William in another. Having been trained as open water divers, Mark and William were qualified to dive within the pool. The instructor and his diving partner, who were first going to look for the concrete anchor, entered the pool and in just one dive were able to retrieve the concrete anchor from the pool. Then each of the teams took their flashlights, ready to explore the thriving pool of Royal Springs. They all entered the water and started diving. Unfortunately, the instructor's diving partner had challenges with equalizing. Before they could continue diving, the instructor had to wait for assistance. Equalizing in diving simply means equalizing pressure between the inside of your ears and the underwater environment. Equalizing is needed because human ears are not naturally adapted to an underwater environment. So while the instructor and his diving partner got down into the water, they couldn't find Mark and William in the pool. Mark and William had sighted a cave inside the pool and entered it. Now, because they had only received training in open water diving and not cave diving, they had no idea of what to expect within the cave. And just as is usually the case in many other caves, they found themselves in the region of zero visibility. What could have impaired the visibility within the cave? Zero visibility is caused by silt out, a condition when the visibility of underwater caves is impaired or completely reduced to zero. This is a result of the disturbance of particles that are at the bottom or on the wall surfaces of the cave. It's mostly caused when divers' fins are used forcefully or directed in the wrong direction, disturbing silt inside the cave. Also, it could be caused when exhaled bubbles from diving gear disturb overhead surfaces, thereby loosening particles from those surfaces. Divers must take caution when diving to avoid all these mistakes. And when cases such as this occur as an emergency, part of the techniques learned during training is to get hold of the guidelines and trace them back to the surface. This is why cave diving is not for untrained divers. These are likely problems they will encounter. If reduced visibility is noticed before entering the cave, it's advisable that a diver exit and not endanger his own life. The instructor and his diving partner had now entered the cave, but couldn't find Mark and William. He became worried and started looking for them. While he was searching for them, he found the entrance to the cave. He told his partner to stay at the entrance while he went inside. He dived a short distance into the cave, but couldn't find them, so he returned to the entrance. He and his diving partner both resurfaced, and he sent his partner to call for help while he quickly went back to the entrance of the cave. He was flashing his light inside the cave and banging on the rocks, thinking the two divers inside would hear the sound and trace their way out of the silted cave. After 45 minutes of waiting, banging, and doing a lot just to ensure they heard him and came out, the rescue diver arrived at the entrance of the cave. The search began, and at about 39 feet into the cave, the rescue diver tied a line and started searching the cavern zone, even in zero visibility. He also tied his reel and left it behind so that if Mark and William find it, they can use it to trace their way back to the cave's entrance. Around 6:30 p.m., 2 hours after Mark and William went into the water, other rescue divers entered the cave and joined the search. They searched 295 feet into the cave. Mark and William were nowhere to be found. As time passed and there was no visibility in the cave, the search team's safety became a concern, so they exited the cave to resume their search the next day. The next day, they began the search and found some signs that the two missing divers might have entered a side tunnel, which is about 380 feet away from the entrance. But there is still a major limitation to entering this tunnel. You can only enter with side-mounted gear. The rescue team entered despite this limitation. Some distance into this side tunnel, they found the body of Mark at about 492 feet into the cave. They continued the search for the second diver, and at about 531 feet into the cave, they found William lying dead at the end of the side tunnel. Their cylinders were empty. What a terrible day at the Royal Springs. 2 divers' lives were lost. The search operation had turned from a rescue operation to a recovery operation. The team brought the 2 bodies out to the surface. Mark and William had gone against the basic safety rules of diving, and death was their consequence. This wasn't a new thing in the diving community. Many divers tended to be daring, ignoring simple instructions to their detriment. Therefore, there are 5 basic safety rules in cave diving that must not be taken for granted by any diver who is conscious of his safety and is not on a death-seeking adventure. Firstly, any diver entering a cave must be trained in cave diving and be mentally prepared to face and tackle any difficulty encountered. An open water diver is not expected to go cave diving unless he has received training in this. Secondly, a diver must carry all the necessary equipment needed for the adventure he is embarking on. But most importantly, he must carry 3 lights for his diving adventure, his primary light and 2 secondary lights. In the worst situation, maybe he doesn't have access to all 3. He must have at least 2 lights. Thirdly, a diver must have a continuous line to the surface. Guidelines are used to navigate back to the entrance when exiting the cave. Some caves have complexity in their systems, and missing one's way happens to be the sure way without a guideline. So a guideline will be the safety measure for this kind of situation. Fourthly, while planning your dive, limit your dive depth to that appropriate for the gas you're breathing. That is, don't go beyond the depth that will require trimix when it is nitrox or oxygen-only gas you carry. This might be dangerous too. And lastly, a diver must obey the rule of thirds for gas management. Once you reach 1/3 of your available gas, start returning to the surface with your second third of air. The last third of air is only used in case of emergencies. If these 5 basic safety rules were being obeyed by every diver, the chances of accidents and deaths would be reduced. Let us all lift the banner of obeying basic diving safety rules in the diving community. Mark and William would have returned safely to the surface if they had not gone against these basic diving safety rules. They were only trained in open water diving, but they embarked on a cave diving adventure, which was totally against their diving plan. The cause of the incident was the result of rule violations. They didn't run any lines from open water into the cave, which could have made them find their way back to the entrance. Also, they didn't have adequate air reserves for emergencies. Both of them only had one flashlight, which is the wrong thing to do. Each was supposed to have at least 2 lights, a primary light and a secondary light. On May 14, 2022, 4 certified divers made their way to Manatee Springs State Park for a diving adventure in its long cave system. They got themselves into big trouble after making several wrong decisions during the dive and had to find their way out without the appropriate knowledge of the cave system. Manatee Springs State Park is located in Levy County, Florida. It flows directly into the Swanee River, and it's one of the longest springs in Florida. There are lots of sinkholes connected to the Swanee. One of them is the 90-foot underground cave, which is linked to the popular place called the Catfish Hotel. It's one of the largest and most popular entrances of the 3 sinkholes at Manatee Springs State Park. You're going to have a great experience diving in this open water sinkhole. The second entrance is the Sioux Sink. It's located at a camping site and is oftentimes used only as an emergency exit. The third is Freedman's Sink. Freedman's Sinkhole is a shallow sinkhole with just a 4-foot diameter, a narrow path into the ceiling of the cave. The Freedman Sinkhole is 1,712 feet away from the Catfish Hotel, which makes it the farthest from the Catfish Hotel. If you have a flair for outdoor activities and you want to have lots of fun, especially in a natural environment, Manatee Springs State Park is one of the best for you. You can decide to go boating, camping, bicycling, fishing, hiking, picnicking, scuba diving, walking, running, or viewing wildlife. Manatee Springs is home to the gentle manatees, after which it was named. Other animals that you can see at the park are largemouth bass, catfish, speckled perch, and brim. Also, Manatee Springs State Park is a place where you can find different types of trees, such as cypress, maple, sweet gum, and ash. On May 14, 2022, a group of divers arrived at Manatee Springs State Park for a diving adventure. The group consisted of 2 fathers and 2 sons, making 4 divers in the entire group. They planned to enter the Manatee Cave System at Freedman's Sinkhole and traverse downstream and exit the cave system at the Catfish Hotel. All 4 divers are new to the Manatee Springs Cave System, though, and they only relied on a video they watched while preparing for their dive. The 4 of them were certified divers, having obtained Intro to Cave certification with about 100 dives. They were fully equipped for the dive. They had their HP 100 side-mounted cylinder, which had a pressure of approximately 3,800 psi. Each of the 4 divers had their primary and backup lights, and the 2 fathers had a floodlight attached to their video cameras. At about 11:17 a.m., the 4 divers entered the cave system using the guideline. They all swam downstream. They were all conscious of the upline that was at Sioux Sink, which ended at Catfish Hotel. They were divided into 2 teams, with the 2 sons on the first team, divers 1 and 3, and the 2 fathers, divers 2 and 4, on the second team. The father's team was following the son's team. When they got to the end of the line they'd been following from Sioux Sink, they doubted if they were really at the exit to the Catfish Hotel. There was no visibility in the region where they were. It was very dark. Then, Diver 1, one of the sons, dived a bit away from that point to see if there was more visibility in that area, but it was the same, so he returned to the other 3 and notified them through the wet note. Manatee, But because they were aware of the previous incident involving a diver that got stuck exiting at Manatee Spring, they had to take another route. They were not sure of their present location, so they turned back and dove towards Sioux Sink. They assumed it could have been the Catfish Hotel exit they had mistaken for Sioux Sink. That was the nearest exit they were aware of. Now they had to restructure the teams. Instead of a father-father team and a son-son team, they made it two father-son teams. When they turned to find the exit, Diver 2, one of the fathers, discovered that his turn pressure was 3,100 psi. He also switched off his video light and swam against the flow. It was really hard for him to swim against the flow because of the current. When they were moving closer to the Sioux Sink, Diver 2 was concerned about himself making it out of the cave. So he started pulling hand over hand and putting his head down. By the time he got to the Sioux Sink upline, he saw Diver 1 already ascending. When Diver 2 turned back to check for the other two divers, he saw that Diver 3 was leading the dive, while Diver 4 was about 10 to 20 feet away from Diver 3. So Diver 2 signaled to the two of them, and they both replied to him. Divers 1 and 2 got out of the cave system safely. Diver 1 exited around 12 o'clock. 43 minutes after they entered the cave system. He returned to the surface with 1,500 psi in both cylinders. Diver 2 exited at 12:05, having 1,500 psi left in one of his cylinders and 850 psi in the second cylinder. Diver 2 called 911 since Diver 3 and 4 had not exited the cave. Instead of diving upline, the two divers missed the way and continued to Friedman's Sink. Diver 4 told his son, Diver 3, to swim faster. When Diver 3 ascended the hill that was just before the upline tee at Friedman's Sink, he looked back and saw Diver 4's video light. So assuming that Diver 4 was coming after him, he made his ascent and exited at Friedman's Sink at about 12:20 with 1,500 psi in one of his cylinders, while the second cylinder was empty. Diver 4 never exited the cave, and the last movements recorded on his computer were at 12:17. Some qualified divers came to the scene and entered the cave system at the Catfish Hotel at about 12:50 in search of Diver 4. From the Catfish Hotel, they dived upstream to Friedman. There, they found his camera and light on the floor of the cave, about 100 feet downstream of Friedman's Sink. The International Underwater Cave Rescue and Recovery, or IUCRR team, came to the scene of the accident. It was a two-member team. They dove into the cave system and found Diver 4's body in a dome about 100 feet downstream of Friedman's Sink, where the first rescue team had seen his camera and light. He had run out of air in his two cylinders. After analyzing the situation, it was discovered that many things contributed to the accident, one of which was the fact that they made too many wrong decisions before and during the dive. Their lack of knowledge about what the Manatee Springs cave system looks like and the high current affected their dive. Besides, their decision to traverse and go upstream into an unfamiliar cave system could also have played a role. They could have entered through the Catfish and dove upstream to set up the traverse. With that, they would have been acquainted with the flow and the distance they would go if they needed to dive upstream. Other factors contributed to the accident apart from the dive plan. One of them is the fact that they turned back instead of using a safety spool to locate the zone of visibility. If this had been done, they would have seen the zone of visibility just 10 to 15 feet away from where they were and known that they were at Catfish. The other fact is that the decision of Diver 4 to use it as a video light after they had turned the dive wasn't the best. The video light would have prevented him from seeing the line or the natural visibility at Sioux Sink. Diver 3 was deceived by the video light, which made him assume that Diver 4 was following him to the Friedman's exit, when he wasn't. And lastly, the four divers didn't work well together as a team. Diver 2 should have waited for Divers 3 and 4 when he signaled to them at Sioux Sink, so that they could get there too and follow him upstream to the surface. Also, Diver 3 ascended the hill to Friedman's Sink and saw Diver 4's light, where Diver 3 didn't wait to ensure they both ascended together. Maybe Diver 3 could have shared gas with Diver 4, who had run out of gas. But possibly, because Diver 3 had little gas left in his cylinder too, he avoided having two casualties. But it remains a mystery in the diving community why four divers who were known to be safety conscious had gone on such a dangerous dive. On November 26, 2003, two men went for a dive at Little River. They both were well familiar with this cave system, but during this dive, they got into trouble and got themselves in a horrible situation. Are you enjoying our cave diving videos and not subscribed yet? Please consider subscribing to our channel. Little River Springs is located in the Spring Country region in the northern part of Florida. It occupies about 125 acres of land in the Swanee River County Park. The Little River Springs has clear water compared to the tea-colored Swanee River. They also have temperature differences. Several recreational activities are available at the Little River Springs, including the popular snorkeling, swimming, canoeing, kayaking, and scuba diving that draws the attention of many divers. Little River is one of the most popular cave diving sites of North Florida. The cave is located between the well-known Devil's Eye and Devil's Ear, and the Ichetucknee Jug Hole and other sites such as Peacock and Cow Spring. The spring is about 150 feet in length and has a 1,200-foot-long cave system in it. The cave has just one main tunnel, but some offshoots and bypasses when you get to the depth of 90 to 100 feet. Within the first 100 feet, most of the intriguing characteristics may be found, as you descend an underwater corkscrew to reach the cave's main chamber. As you go farther into the cave, you'll discover that the system of the cave changes. It becomes lower and wider, with thicker silt covering its walls and floors compared to the beginning of the cave, which has huge rocky passages that have diver traffic and clean water. If you can dive to the end of the cave, you'll see the well casing. Here you'll see a man-made well that a farmer had sunk into the spring to make use of the crystal clear water. On the 26th of November 2003, a day preceding Thanksgiving, 42-year-old Jerry Dwayne Beats went for a dive at Little River Springs together with his uncle Kane Overfield, 46 years old. Both Jerry and Kane were certified and experienced cave divers. Jerry was even certified as a diving instructor. They dived into the Little River Springs cave up to 20 times in the past. For this dive, they planned just an 80-minute dive. They started their dive in the middle of the day, each with their scooters, also known as diver propulsion vehicles, DPVs. The scooters are used to increase their range underwater. Scooters aid divers in saving more air and moving faster between different regions while diving. They had to dive through the water body using the main gold line, which is not far from the 100-foot arrow. Several shortcut tunnels take divers to various spots down the chimney, top, middle, or near the bottom. Kane and Jerry continued their dive and agreed to keep an eye on their air using the rule of thirds. For those of you who are not familiar with this concept, divers will use 1/3 of the air to enter the cave, 1/3 of the air for leaving the cave, and 1/3 for emergency use in case of necessity. So Kane and Jerry would start returning to the surface once either of them used up 1/3 of their air. And for this to happen, that means they must have gotten to the well casing, they assume. Though reaching the well casing is risky, they both knew that a diver had once drowned after getting to the well casing in March 2003. Maybe this happened to him because he was inexperienced, but Kane and Jerry were both experienced, qualified divers. They knew what to do at the well casing to avoid this. As mentioned before, Little River has just one main tunnel. Following the main line, when a diver gets to 900 feet, the main line divides, and at this point, divers can go through the Serpentine Way or the merry-go-round tunnels. However, both tunnels converge at the large Florida Room. To get to the well casing, they had to follow the permanent line down a hard left and turn into the cave. As they dive deeper, visibility must be maintained so as not to get lost. Going further, they had to dive through the dome room where the bottom part goes, and over a large quantity of sand breakdown pile. Unlike the path they came through, which was made up of rocky passageways, this section is made up of a thick layer of mud and silt covering the floor. When divers take their scooters all the way down to this section, they need to turn them off and park them aside. They will continue their journey without it. They were moving towards the well casing before Kane sensed that his nephew, Jerry, had stopped following him. After going further for about 200 to 300 feet, he realized that he was now on his own. Jerry was nowhere to be seen. Kane became confused as he had earlier thought that Jerry was behind him, so he decided to return to the well casing to see if Jerry was there or around the place. On getting to the well casing, something unexpected happened. The well casing had become silted out. Silt out in diving means that silt that's on the surface of the wall has been disturbed, causing a significant reduction in visibility. Kane couldn't see much of anything at all. He didn't delay for long and started looking for Jerry within the silt. After searching for a while, he stumbled on Jerry and took hold of him. According to Kane, Jerry seemed to be okay. However, Kane released him shortly after because he needed to fix his scooter on the line. Having successfully done that, he tried to grab his nephew again, but Jerry was gone now. He got lost in the silt. Kane wasn't able to see him, but he got into the low-visibility water and started looking for him. He continued swimming through the silt until he got to the clear waters. Kane started banging on his tank, thinking that Jerry would hear it and find his way back to the clear water. However, he stopped the banging after a while. He assumed that Jerry would have used the sound and might have gone ahead of him and gone out of the spring. Kane started his process of decompression and got back to the surface. To his greatest surprise, Jerry wasn't on the surface. He realized that somehow he had lost Jerry among the silt, so he called out for help from the diver that was nearby. Kane was able to find Tommy Roberts, one of the officers at the Little River Springs. Jerry had stayed an extra 45 minutes in the cave at the time they got ready to search for him. Tommy sought out some other divers, and they began the search. 4 divers went into the cave to search for him, but to no avail. What could have happened to Jerry? They began a second search until they saw him at the end of the Florida room. The Florida room is one of the rooms within the cave, and it was about 1,200 feet from the entrance. He seemed to be lifeless. The search team offered him air, but he didn't respond to it. His tank had been empty. The Little River Springs authorities called the rescue team that went into the cave to recover his body and the 2 scooters. Kane's scooter was found clipped to the line at the well casing, while Jerry's scooter was found about 328 feet after the dome room. It seems that Jerry had scratched his scooter on the walls of the cave while trying to get out. All the body parts of his scooter were covered with clay. Also, Tommy said that Jerry would have caused the silt to settle on the propeller of his scooter when he was struggling with it. This could have gotten him disoriented, and because of the silt that had caused poor visibility, he couldn't find his way out. Jerry must have been absolutely terrified during his last moments of struggling to escape. He drowned when he couldn't get out. Jerry left behind a wife and a baby. He was later buried at St. John the Apostle Catholic Church. During his funeral, it was obvious that Jerry was dear to his friends and family. What happens when a cave diver disappears without a trace? In today's video, we'll cover one of the most disturbing cave diving stories we've covered on this channel so far. Watch till the end as we unravel the mystery behind the disappearance and the huge efforts of 16 divers to search for the missing diver. The Vortex Spring is a cold freshwater spring with a water flow of more than 28 million U.S. gallons per day. It's located north of Ponce de Leon, Florida. The spring has a cave that connects to the Florida aquifer. It has a constant water temperature of about 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Its runoff flows directly into Otter Creek, which is not far from Vortex Spring. The spring has several species of fish in it, including large carp and freshwater eels. The cave system in Vortex Spring is about 1,642 feet long. Both experienced and inexperienced divers frequently go into the cave system in the Vortex Spring for an adventure, but there's an opportunity for the inexperienced divers to be trained right at the Vortex Spring Park in the 2 underwater training grounds, which are about 20 feet. These are frequently used for open water certification dives. The opening of the entrance to the cave is 9 by 12 feet and is about 58 feet below the surface. There's a handrail that is mounted along the wall of the cave. You can't reach farther than 310 feet. There is a restriction placed on other passages because they're considered dangerous. Ben McDaniels went to Tennessee to spend a week 4 months after he relocated to Florida. He was training to get certified as an instructor so that he could get employment through that. Also, he had been developing an interest in cave diving in recent times and hoped to get cave diving certification as well. Ben told his girlfriend, Emily Greer, that he had the plan to start a diving business. So he left his parents in Tennessee, dropped off an appreciation letter with a promise to take good care of them during their old age, and returned to Florida during the weekend of August 14th and 15th. On August 18, 2010, Ben left for Santa Rosa Beach House in the Vortex Spring as he normally does. Ben went for a dive during the day and was looking closely at the entrance. Other divers that saw him thought that perhaps he had a plan. He returned to the surface to fill his cylinders at a dive shop. He was testing his equipment and writing in his dive log, all alone, staying close to the spring in the afternoon. During the evening, Ben started preparations for another dive. At about 7:30 p.m., Ben entered the water to dive again, with his light on and a helmet on. While he was entering, Cronin and Eduardo Terran were returning from their usual dive adventure. When Terran perceived that Ben was forcing himself to open the gate, he dove again to unlock it for Ben. He returned to the surface as soon as he saw that Ben had entered the cave. Usually, Cronin used to wait to see the bubbles that indicated Ben's decompression process whenever he dove at night. But this particular night, he and his friend just returned to Terran's house to relax without watching Ben's movements. Ben had earlier parked his truck in the parking lot before he went for the dive. On the following morning, his truck was still parked at the same spot, but no one had seen Ben since he went for a dive the previous night. When Terran discovered this, he called the Holmes County Sheriff's Office and reported that a diver was missing. When the sheriff's deputies came to the scene, they sealed it up as a crime scene. They couldn't find any of Ben's diving equipment around his truck. The only thing they saw was his wallet with some cash in it and his cell phone. They saw his dive logs, which indicated that he had dived into the cave, and they saw the map that he had made. His unfed dog was found at Santa Rosa Beach House by the officers. The police and those at the dive shop assumed that Ben had drowned in the cave when he was struggling to get out. The news spread abroad, and volunteer cave divers came to the scene for a recovery operation during the weekend. They informed Ben's parents, the McDaniels, and his girlfriend, Emily Greer, who all came to Florida to watch the recovery operation from the surface. Captain Harry Hamilton, an investigator in Holmes County, concluded that the recovery operation could only be done by skilled divers because the operation seems to be a dangerous attempt. Some experienced divers that were present at the scene of the incident made their way into the cave. They searched everywhere within the cave, both the large passages and the small ones, but couldn't see any sign of a body in them. The divers that went for the recovery operation had their toughest time in it, as they almost lost their lives in the operation. During the weekend, some other sets of divers also searched through the cave, but all to no avail. But during their search, they found some of Ben's equipment. 2 tanks were found very close to the cave's entrance. The search team was astonished by this supposed action of Ben, who had no technical permission to dive into such a cave. As a cave diver, extra cylinders that are supposed to be for decompression should be at different points along their exit, and not only at the entrance. When analyzed, the cylinders contained normal gas instead of a mixture of gases that is needed for the depth to which they supposed Ben had dived. On August 22, 2010, 4 days after Ben entered the cave, Ed Sorensen, a veteran diver and recovery specialist, was contacted for the recovery of Ben's body from the Vortex cave system. Ed had made close to 2,500 dives, and he was considered the best option for such a dangerous recovery operation. He came to the scene the following day for recovery. Other divers informed him about the difficulties of diving in the Vortex Springs cave system beyond the places they'd been to. But Ed is known as a diver who goes far beyond where other divers could dare enter, and he accepted to go in for the search. He entered the cave, reaching about 1,700 feet. That was about 200 feet beyond the place that Ben had earlier mapped. Ed went into the cave with a diver's propulsion vehicle and smaller cylinders so that his dive would be very fast. There was no mark made on the walls of the cave as a sign that someone had been to such depths when Ed got there. Besides, the silt seems never to have been disturbed. Ed didn't find anyone inside the cave despite his 3 attempts. Ed also said that Ben's possibility of entering the narrow passages of this cave system was limited because he had not even had training in cave diving. So he concluded that Ben wasn't inside the cave. All of Ben's parents' efforts to help with the search for their son became futile. Again, they called Steve Keene, an experienced and skilled diver who had mapped the Vortex Springs cave system in 2003. Steve made 7 dives into the cave without finding any sign of a body within it, so he apologized to the McDaniels, Ben's parents, that he couldn't find their son. The McDaniels were determined to get their son's body back at all costs, so they offered thousands of dollars to whoever could help search for the body within the cave. But no one could, so they offered about $54,000 as a replacement cost for the remotely operated underwater vehicle that was brought for the search in case it got lost in the cave. But the remotely operated underwater vehicle wasn't able to go beyond the places where human divers had gone because of some technical issues. Within 36 consecutive days after Ben went missing, 16 divers risked their lives searching for his body, all to no avail. Up until November 2010, different searches were made in the cave, but nothing came out of it. When the search inside the cave proved abortive, suggestions came as to searching on land. Perhaps his body was secretly taken away from the cave before they began the search or disposed of on land. They also thought maybe the water had washed his body out through the spring's outlet. Some other divers, including Cronin and Kelly, assumed that Ben could have arranged his disappearance to start his life in a new place and forget about his past pains. The authorities considered these possibilities and started searching on land with some cadaver dogs. The dogs searched through the woods that were around Vortex Springs, but they couldn't find anything either. Also, helicopters were used to search the swamps along the spring's outflow into Blue Creek and Sandy Creek to the Choctawhatchee River. They also carried out about 30 different tests of the spring's water for months to see if there was any increase in bacteria activities in the water that could be an indication of the decomposition of a human body in the water. But none of the tests showed the supposed sign. A lie detector test was conducted for Taryn, who let Ben into the cave, but he passed the test without any further suspicion. This was how the disappearance of Ben McDaniels in the Vortex Springs became a mystery for more than 10 years. The last story of this Florida Special Cave Diving Marathon is a tragic incident involving a diver who made the worst mistakes cave divers can make: facing problems and not telling your teammates about it. The Rubidoux Spring Cave is a second-magnitude freshwater spring and is located in Waynesville in the region of Ozark Plateau, Missouri, in the United States. The spring releases water from the base of a rock ledge, which is capped with a big concrete wall that holds the road that runs over the spring. The water from the spring flows into the Rubidoux Spring in just a short distance. The spring was named after Joseph Rubidoux, a French-Canadian fur trader in the 18th century. Rubidoux Spring is about 57.4 miles in length. It's a landmark that is nestled in the southern part of downtown Waynesville. There's a city park at the site, which has many trails and a boardwalk. It gives a wonderful experience if you go for an adventure there. In Waynesville town, there are several caves, springs, and big sinkholes with short intervals because this particular region has an intense karst landscape. A karst landscape is a landscape with dissolvable bedrock that results in caves, sinkholes, springs, and sinking streams. Karst refers to the soluble rocks such as limestone, marble, and gypsum. That's what these regions are made up of. Rubidoux Spring cave exploration had begun many years before 1977, and there had been several visits to the Rubidoux Spring cave's overhead section. But in 1977, Carlson, Delaney, Rimbach, and Tatalovich went on several diving adventures to create more access within the cave. They and several other passionate divers did their best to expand access to the cave. Part of their discovery was Witchaway Avenue and the Big Room. The Witchaway Avenue is a lower tunnel that is about 1,600 feet to the Big Room and beyond. It's also about 150 feet deep and about 4.5 feet high. The Big Room has now become a place every diver wishes to visit. The Big Room is about 40 feet in height and 80 feet in width. It has a constant depth of about 160 feet. It has polished, arduous silt that has just a few breakdowns, unlike the floor of Witchaway Avenue that's filled with pores. On August the 23rd, 2003, 3 divers decided to explore the big room at a depth of 165 feet and as far as 1,400 feet away from the cave's entrance. The divers were Stephen Wybrocht, Ron Shirley, and John Davis. These 3 divers all had their certifications and were permitted to explore the cave. They all had the right equipment used for exploration. They would use a nitrox tank containing a mixture of oxygen and nitrogen when entering the cave and stage on the line for decompression time. Besides these tanks, they were carrying double travel tanks which contain trimix. This breathing gas consists of oxygen, nitrogen, and helium to reduce the narcosis effects when diving in deep waters. Well-equipped, the 3 divers set out to accomplish their diving purpose, an exploration of the big room. They also took along scooters for propulsion. They had to put on dry suits because the temperature of the water is about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. What was their diving plan? It's important for every diver to have a plan before embarking on a diving adventure. It's a major process that ensures divers experience a safe dive and can achieve their goals. This is what will clarify your purpose of diving, the direction you want to go, the necessary equipment needed to accomplish that purpose, and above all, the technique you're going to use to fulfill your purpose of diving. So these 3 diving buddies have their planned techniques well spelled out. They plan to use their nitrox tank while entering the cave, from the entrance to the drop-off. The drop-off is a room that is 350 feet away from the entrance. The passageways from this room descend from a depth of 50 feet to 135 feet. Then they would enter a lower tunnel passage. From there, they would switch to trimix cylinders and leave the nitrox tank staged on the line for use during decompression. They would go along the lower tunnel to the big room, which is about 1,100 feet away, using their scooters. While returning to the surface, their decompression stop is at the drop-off and the pool of the spring, where they would pick up the nitrox tank they left earlier for decompression. They also planned to return when they reached the big room, or whatever point they reached where one of them was running out of gas in his travel stage bottle. It was wonderful and carefully highlighted the plans they had prepared. The divers were ready for their dive. They'd gotten every detail needed, so they began the dive. When they got to 20 feet, they left behind an oxygen tank for the last stage of decompression. As they continued their dives, they found the permanent guideline. This line was found just 75 feet away from the entrance. With the guidelines in hand, they went further into the cave. They used their scooters to follow the line into the overhead tunnel. They dove through this tunnel, which was as long as 350 feet and as deep as 45 feet, till they got to the drop-off. At 70 feet, they left a tank each for decompression when returning to the surface just as planned. They continued diving into the big room. They needed to pass through Witchaway Avenue. The dive is going quite well for the 3 divers. Without any ado, they continued their dive into the big room. While still on the journey, Stephen's travel stage bottle got exhausted sooner than expected. To continue with the journey with his friends, he switched to his back tanks without the knowledge of his friends. This switch was too early, of course. They still had a long way to go. They eventually reached their goal, the big room. After that, they began to return through Witchaway Avenue. The pressure in Stephen's back tank had dropped to 500 psi. At this point, he could not keep it to himself. He informed Ron about it. Ron helped him with his extra regulator. The regulator was attached to a long hose. They both continued towards the drop-off. Their progress became hindered because Stephen could no longer control his buoyancy effectively. John, the 3rd diver, was not carried along with these difficulties they were both experiencing, so he went ahead of them. Stephen was able to get through the tunnel of about 100 feet when the challenge aggravated. He went too far ahead of Ron, until the long hose connecting his share regulator was removed from his mouth. He quickly went back to Ron to use his support regulator, took some breaths, and signaled OK to Ron. Ron searched and found the long hose that got disconnected from Stephen and picked it up. At this point, Ron realized he couldn't see Stephen again because of poor visibility caused by the silt kicked up during those activities. Ron continued to the 70-foot decompression stop where their bottles were staged while entering the cave. He found Stephen's bottle still there, but John had taken his bottle and left before he came. Though he couldn't find Stephen, Ron took his bottle and proceeded toward the entrance. Ron saw another group of divers going through the room and assumed Stephen would have been to them for help. Ron got to the surface but couldn't find Stephen, so he reported him missing and sought help to go in search of him. Soon after these search team divers entered the cave, they found the body of Stephen on the roof of the area where he separated from Ron. His body was found floating on this roof. His double tanks were found empty. His exhaust valve that was on his dry suit was closed. What a tragic turn of events. One of the major mistakes Stephen made was not informing his diving buddies about the emptiness of his travel tank when they were going to the big room. This was against their dive plan. Also, it was discovered that his regulator was in a very sensitive setting, which could have caused the regulator to operate in a condition of free flow. Stephen was also using a scooter for the first time in his diving career. It might have been that when the gas was escaping, the noise from the scooter didn't allow Stephen to sense the escape of his gas when they were journeying into the cave. Also, the three divers didn't keep good communication due to poor visibility and their separation from one another. All these, together with the inability to effectively control his buoyancy and poor gas management in the first instance, made the dive end up being a tragedy rather than an accomplishment of their intended goal. This was the third cave diving marathon on this channel. Let us know what you think in the comments section. If you enjoyed watching, take a dive on the like and subscribe buttons and hit the bell icon so you get notified when we come back with another exciting diving story.